How you guys doing? This video is going to be on the sound of your guitar setup and working on your technique, and some helpful hints and advice to help you get there and to understand that it's a complex process, but if you try to go about it in a simplified way rather than seeing it as this large complex process, that you'll move forward with it a lot more gracefully. So I just wanted to put a little front on this video before we get started, and so that as you're addressing these issues, because at this point you're going to probably very rapidly starting to address these issues because you've got a fairly basic and good comprehension of the basic building blocks, the most basic building blocks of music theory if you watch the series up to this point, and you're probably going to want to plug in at this point. If you're not and you're playing an acoustic and you're not plugging in at all, you might want to watch this video anyway. But it's kind of to try to help you understand the complex process that does happen developing your technique and your sound, using what guitars, what amplifiers, and all those kind of things as you progress, so that it doesn't seem overwhelming to anybody, whether they're beginner, intermediate, or advanced. So peace, hope, love. Let's address the issue. So let's address that. There's two huge concepts that we want to talk about. First of all is your technique and style, and the other is your sound, meaning your guitar and your amplifier and things like that. So we're going to address those things, and both of these concepts are extreme abstract theory. First of all, one thing to get through your head right now so that you don't ever get in this argument again is there is no best amplifier, there is no best guitar, there is no best stomp box or type of stomp box. Billy likes this setup, Bob likes that setup because of his style, the way he plays, and it's going to change. I've had guys that I've taught for years and talked with. They've changed guitars 10 times. They've changed amps 15 times. They've changed their stomp box setups I don't know how many times, because as they develop, they change as they're getting better to where what they want that helps voice their sound is better at voicing their technique and sound. And here I'll give you an example so that this really hits home, that you learn this really early, or even if you're an advanced player, that it's something that's getting driven into you. There's a story that I heard that Sammy Hagar was on tour with Van Halen, and Eddie was getting drunk, and Sammy walked up the stage, wanted to use Eddie's guitar and plug into his amplifier, and wanted to be Eddie Van Halen for a while. Well, the technician was like, all right, bro, no problem. You know, and so he plugged him in, and Sammy was hooked, the technician that he's playing on. He says, I don't sound like Van Halen. I don't sound like Eddie Van Halen. I don't got that tone. I don't have that sound. It's nothing. I mean, I sound like me with, you know, and a different amplifier, you know, and it's like, but the style, everything that was Eddie Van Halen, and his sound and his tone and all the stuff he does, it wasn't there. Because somebody like Sammy Hagar has been playing a long time and did not understand that it's because of practice and experimentation and developing his own style. It didn't have nowhere near as much to do with his guitar, his amplifier, as it had to do with his mind and his hands. You know, and that's a huge thing to learn and to understand, and now you understand that because it's there, the very basic foundations of his whole style. Does that make sense? It was in him practicing and experimenting with his own technique and style, what kind of things and articulations he liked to use, how we voiced different types of articulations, and that came from practice. Even just simple thing like bends, doing them over and over and over again while he's improvising and playing around, started to develop into his own style of how he did it, that Sammy Hagar was never going to emulate, because Sammy Hagar sounded like Sammy Hagar, didn't sound like Eddie Van Halen. He didn't develop Eddie Van Halen's style, he developed Sammy Hagar's style. So he couldn't understand why he didn't sound like Eddie Van Halen through his amplifier. That's a huge concept to get through your head. And your amplifier, your guitar, and your style more than likely are going to change over time. So don't get all excited about it, don't freak out about it, because you need to get the perfect amplifier, the perfect guitar for your style that hasn't even developed at that point yet. Don't get all worried about it, just take it easy. The best remedy for work on your style and technique is working on the basics, moving around the modes and the chords and things like that, and practice, improvising, developing your own style and how you move around the fretboard, what kind of articulations you like to use, what type how do you like to use the modes, what kind of passing tones you like to use, that become very definitive in your own style. And the only person that's going to be able to tell you that is you. You will see that you like that or you don't like that. No feedback is going to answer that question but you. Does that make sense? You can get feedback on if you're performing it well. Whether or not you're completely happy with your style and technique or amplifier or whatever, that you can get feedback on if you're performing it well. If you're clean, if you're clear, if it was well performed. Does that, if you were in time, things like that. You can get feedback to that from, it's very helpful. Does that make sense? The other stuff's got to come from here. And that comes from you practicing and improvising. So that's something you have to really work on. Some of the biggest things, lick factory we'll get into, but I wouldn't be that much concerned about it at first. Articulations can be important, you know, different types of articulations, even some like staccato and portamento. I mean, get on the internet and get a list of possible articulations for the guitar and practice 5 minutes a day those things. You'll eventually develop some of them into your own style and technique, but it's going to be more important just how you move around the fretboard and around the modes, which we'll talk about. But that comes from practice, and that's the most important abstract theory to teach you, is that you're basically going to learn it on your own. It's like somebody comes to me, how do I hold my guitar pick? And I say, I don't know, bro, kind of like this. You know what? I don't know, you're holding the pick so you can actually hit the strings. Yeah, and it's simple, you know, you want to hit the strings. And then they go, well, that's not like really professional advice, bro. And I say, well, because, you know, I teach you eventually, you're eventually going to develop your own style and technique, how you hold the guitar pick, how it's comfortable for you, what angle you hold it for the way that you're playing, and that's going to be how you hold the pick, bro. I mean, it just is. You know, I mean, there's no way to teach you that. You're going to develop that on your own. Just like the way you move around the guitar, how you hold the fretboard. I'll normally teach people classical position. You know, I mean, very, very classical in holding it. But sometimes I don't. You're going to be playing very not classical, you know, at an angle and stuff like that sometimes, you know, to get a certain sound or something. And that just comes from practice. And it's really hard to teach you what the best way is to do that. Unless you're going to be a classical guitarist, then I know exactly how I'm going to teach you. But most people aren't. They'll be somewhere using some of that sometimes, but not all the time. Does that make sense? So it becomes very difficult. We'll develop your own style as you play. So that's a very important concept to get in your head. Practice, practice, practice. Get feedback on how well you perform, if it's in time, if it's clean and clear. And, you know, those things you get good feedback on. And if you want feedback on your technique and style and how it sounds, and if you have questions about it that you're trying to develop, really think about how you're going to voice that to someone to articulate to somebody what is the issue that you're trying to get, and then PM somebody you really think can give you a good answer. Find somebody in a group, Ralph, and you really look up to Ralph and he seems like he's a decent guitar player that might really be able to help you with that, and ask him for a real critical critique on what's going on. But remember, Ralph's not trying to have your style and technique, so take it with a grain of salt that he's giving his opinion. Does that make sense? That doesn't mean that's the way it's supposed to be, because you may not be, that might not work out exactly what you need to develop your style. Does that make sense? And that can be very hard to tell somebody so they don't get wrapped up like, oh no, Bob told me I suck. You know, it's like, well, Bob, you know, loves Bonnie Raitt and you like, you know, death metal Bob. You know, it's like, well, I mean, I don't know that he's, you know, does that make sense? And that may sound really far out there, but it's very true even in closer niches. So remember that. And that should really help you a lot to just get you practicing and improvising. And it will come as you go. Your guitar may change, your amplifier may change, your technique's going to change, and it will develop as you go. Try to have fun. You know, don't worry so much about it's got to be so such and such a way, because that's probably going to change as you develop. And so, you know, there you are. And so that answers that, I hope, in a way that will just get you practicing and not worrying about that so much, and understanding that it's going to come from you more than it's going to come from somebody else. You know, does that make sense? Teachers can help you with a lot of things, but that is something that's going to come from you over time. So work on you. Does that make sense? And work on your development. Does that make sense? Your hands development and your mind development, the connection between them developing into your own personal style and sound. So with that said, it can be a lot more complicated, and I can help you with those areas, but we'll leave it at that to get you just practice and understand that way. You kind of let that line just roll. And the next thing I want to talk about is sound on your guitar and your amplifier. We just talked about that a little bit, and I want to re-emphasize that there is no best guitar, there is no best amplifier, there is no best stomp box. There ain't none of that. So don't even go there. That may change and probably will over time which one you like with the type of way you play. Because if I play even something simple like that, even something really simple like that, I play that through a Plexi or through a Marshall or through a Brit, it's going to sound different. If I play that through a Gibson or a Jackson, or I play that through some other guitar, it's going to sound different. If I, the way I have the tone knobs, the way I have the amp set up, it'll sound different. So it's really hard to say which one's best. It's going to be more important, like the thing we talked about with Van Halen and with Sammy Hagar, is your style and technique. So let's go to the basics. The basics of your style and technique, let's work on that, on your sound. Even if you're playing acoustic guitar, this is good practice to plug into an amplifier. A little bit of delay, a little bit of reverb, and a little bit of chorus. This is to build body on your sound. And I'm going to explain this really simple, that lets you, with all three of those, let's just start out with the reverb. So you turn on the reverb, and you're playing, and you hear reverb. There's reverb back there. Back off some, to where you can't really hear there's a lot of reverb, but there might be just a little bit, but you can't tell there's a lot of reverb. Perfect. Right like that. Okay? Same thing with the delay, and same thing with the chorus. That chorus is real important, because you get the chorus and go, whoa, it's like chorus back there. Back off. Because you don't want the chorus sound. You want it to add body to your playing. And the real important concept to get through your head here, no matter what level at, no matter what amplifier you're using, no matter what guitar you're playing, it adds a really good foundation for you to work on your technique and style. It adds body. It adds body and fullness to your sound. Trust me on this. Experiment around with it. And when you understand that, you have no idea how many guitarists I've talked to, and they'll be like, I'll teach them this, and all of a sudden, it's like, they're done. They're like, I don't even hardly even use the distortion anymore, bro. I put that on there, and I start playing, I worked on my technique and style, and it sounds awesome. I got this great full sound, and I'm more worried about how I'm actually playing, my technique and style to make it sound good coming through there. And they're good to go. Some of them might add a little bit of distortion when you get into really heavy metal guys that, their distortion all sounds like it's got a nice fuller sound. Does that make sense? And it's very helpful. And play like that for a while. You'd be surprised. And you more than likely will keep that set up. Maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less of each one of those, depending on how your style develops, as a foundation underneath whatever types of effects you might use. Distortion or flange or whatever you might, be into with your style, the way you play. And you might just stick with that. You might go, that just sounds cool. I'm just good to go. I got those three things underneath it. My guitar sounds really good and full, and I'm good. I don't even hardly use any other effects at all. And you'd be surprised how many people I've had say that. And it's like, well, because you got a nice full sound in it, and you might turn up the chorus just a little bit, or you might turn up the reverb just a little bit, or you might turn up the delay just a little bit, depending on your style. And with those on there, you might add another delay, or another reverb, or another type of chorus or flange effect or something like that on top of it. And it's basically, the concept of that is, it's like an A major triad. You've got an A major triad that's a root, the third, and the fifth. That's the basic chord. If you play it like a bar chord, it's those basic three tones, like the reverb, the delay, and the chorus. That's a basic chord. But if you like playing A major, or if you play a different type of A with an add-on to it, like, a seventh or something, like an A seventh, does that make sense? It changes it. It gives it a different texture. Or, a dominant seventh. Does that make sense? Which is going to work for different type of applications, different type of genres, different types of styles, that those chords, just like your sound, with a little more flange or distortion, something like that, is going to sound different with that type of style. But with that foundation, and if you work with it for a while, you'll be surprised how much it helps you. Because if you play with it for a few weeks or a month or two, you'll be surprised how much you realize how much it helped you. And you're not so much worried about that. And as you understand what that's doing to your playing and giving it a nice fullness, Then you start worrying about the tone knob on your guitar, which pickups you're using, and then later on maybe you might add some distortion or something, and you will find that you'll be much more specific about what you add to change the sound or the tone of your guitar with that happening, and as you develop your style. And it's a huge concept because with a different guitar, it's going to sound different. With a different amp, it's going to sound different. So I recommend a modeling amplifier for you to start with that has a range of different amp choices on it for you to experiment around with a Plexi or with a Marshall or things like that. Does that make sense? So, and that basically will really help you get over that hump, because it's really surprising how many people, unless they're into a lot of distortion, that they set up themselves like that in the amplifier, even if they're just playing acoustic, and realize how much better it makes their sound and how much it emphasizes their technique and gets them focusing less on the sound of their guitar and the amplifier and more focusing on the sound of their technique and style, and really working on that. And it's a huge thing to get into your head and to really practice with and try out, and you'd be surprised. And keep that as your foundation underneath of whatever you might be doing. And whether it's heavy metal and you have a lot of distortion, or you like some flanger or phasers or whatever you might be putting back behind there, that it's a really good foundation just lightly underneath it that just adds this fullness to your guitar. And you'd be surprised how much that takes that out of that. Because then when you start noticing that, well, you're playing, and I'm playing on like a Strat type of guitar, it's got a certain type of texture. Now with that foundation underneath it, that all of a sudden it's got this fullness. But I'm not thinking so much about the sound of my guitar sounds and my amplifiers and my effects and things like that. Now I'm more worried about the guitar and the tones, what's happening there. It's a little too crisp, it's a little bit too muddy, it's a little bit too bassy. I want to clean that out a little bit and then start practicing. That will probably change as you get better in practice, but you're working towards that. And it takes that whole thing out of your head, worrying about what effects you're using and how it sounds, and you really understand that those effects really build the body of whatever the guitar you're using and amplifier you're using at the time, emphasizes it and makes it sound better. That way, as you get better, that you understand, and you can experiment. You can get other guitars or other amplifiers, and and experiment with them with that on there, and to understand what's going to work best for you. Does that make sense? But that basically takes that out of it. The only other things you're really talking about, what, like distortion or something like that, because now you've got a nice, good, clean sound, and how much you want to distort it or mangle it to get some type of effect. Some dirty grunge rock sound, or some kind of rocky hillbilly sound, a little bit of distortion, or some heavy metal stuff. With that foundation, it's going to really emphasize anything else you add on top of it. Does that make sense? And make it sound fuller and better. So you will get that in your head as you experiment. But play like that for a while, you'll be really surprised how much more you start focusing on your hands, your own technique, and you will notice that it really emphasizes the way your guitar sounds. Like I like my Strat, where it would sound a lot heavier, bassy end that on like a Gibson Les Paul or something like that. Then I don't really like the sound as much as I used to. I lean more towards this style of guitar. But it will going to emphasize it. And then you can focus on more of your style and your technique, how you're playing, because that setup is just helping emphasize it, give whatever you're doing a nice, clean, full sound that has a little bit of effect to it. Does that make sense? But not so much to where it muddies it, to where you've dirtied it up so bad to where nothing, it doesn't, your accuracy, the cleanliness of your playing is getting lost in all the effects crap that you're using, rather than you focus on what's important, your hands and your mind, working on your technique and style. Does that make sense? Which is way more important than the sound. Later on, as you develop your style and you really realize when you're playing heavy metal, you're doing something, and well, so much distortion sounds really good like that. It's got a sound with the guitar you're using, and that can get really complicated, and I'm not going to lie to you and tell you that You know, because when you start getting a little more advanced and your style and technique starts to develop, that what guitar you use, what amplifier you use, how you set up your pickups, what pickups you use, and how you set your tone knob is really going to affect how your style and your technique sounds. Does that make sense? Which inadvertently probably will change your technique and style. So it's really hard to try to get you out of that. Is more important to get you out of that. I don't care what guitar you have. I don't care what amplifier you have. Set it up like that. Worry about your technique and style. As you develop that more, that you may realize that it may sound better through a Gibson or whatever you might be wanting to play, or through a different amplifier. But don't get so lost in that. If you've got a lot of work to do to work on your own style and technique, which is much more important. And as you develop that, you will find that no matter what guitar you pick up, or no matter what amplifier you plug into, that with that basic setup, you're going to still sound like you. Does that make sense? And if you, like, say you're at Van Halen, you like the distortion, so you crank up distortion. You set it up like that on just about any guitar and amplifier, you're still going to sound like you. Maybe not exactly, because once you get really good and you get developed, that you're more likely going to gravitate towards some type of setup, a certain type of guitar, a certain type of amplifier, because you've really practiced your technique and really became comfortable with it, and then set yourself up with that guitar and that amplifier, and then have practiced your technique and style with that guitar and amplifier. That guitar, that amplifier, and how you have set them up now have become part of your style and technique. But that should come later, once you've developed your style and technique pretty well. Some people never do. They'll leave the amp set up like I just talked about, and with the guitar they got and the amplifier they got, they're good to go. And their style will develop to a point to where they may buy a better guitar or a better amplifier, but it wasn't so much about changing a guitar and amplifier, because of their style and technique they were really comfortable with, because they had taken the time to develop it, and not so much worried about the guitar or the amplifier, and developed more themselves rather than trying to develop that. Does that make sense? And that's a huge abstract theory to get through your head, and focus more on that. That simple setup will help you do that. And then, you know, practice, 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 practice. Peace, hope, love. I hope you enjoyed this Friday night video. Next week, we're going to talk about some theory, and I'm sorry I knew. We're going to talk about basic chords, the basic chords that you should be using, and the advanced chords that you can form from them, the basic scales and modes that I think you should be focused on, so that you can just get playing and having fun and not get lost in a mountain of theory. Peace, hope, love. Hope you enjoyed the video. See you next week.